welcome to the broadcast Baratunde Thurston, writer, activist, comedian, former producer for The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. Quarantine life has him hosting his own show, Live on Lockdown on Instagram Live. Also happens to be the author of the New York Times bestseller, How to Be Black. Thank you very much for coming on. We've been looking forward to talking to you. Were you comforted or troubled to hear our president say about Lincoln, he did good while always questionable? Because I got to say, I've always had my doubts about that guy.
Yeah, comfort isn't the word I would use, Brian. Thank you so much for having me. Most of what this president does is troubling, if not outright unconstitutional, including comments about an actually great president, Abraham Lincoln.
How about these comments quoted in the NBC News piece? President watching people in the streets 18 days and nights, people who will bring about actual social change and are part of a generational, demographic, huge social change in this country. He looks at them and says they aren't my voters. And imagine if Ike hadn't sent federal troops in, if JFK hadn't sent his brother, if LBJ hadn't staked his presidency on it, if they had instead said, they aren't my voters.
Every opportunity this president has faced to choose either himself or the interests of the public good, he has chosen himself. The challenge now is we're in an increasingly common moment, at least of awareness, that racism is still real, that police are out of control when it comes to Black people and the use of force. And it's become so safe that the majority of the country, 2/3, now side with Black Lives Matter. It's so safe that Mitt Romney feels comfortable going to a Black Lives Matter rally. It's so safe that NASCAR has banned the Confederate flag at its own events. Yet this president still doesn't feel safe. He's so insecure because he's not really the president of all of us. He is the president of a small and shrinking group of extremists who are out of touch with the increasing consensus that there is a truth to this country that we are ready to start to really reckon with.
I want to quote you something from a longtime friend of this broadcast, Pulitzer Prize winner Eugene Robinson of the Washington Post, who writes, under the headline, Trump might go down in history as the last president of the Confederacy, we quote, Trump must be bewildered. Unsubtle appeals to racial animus, remember his birther lies, have always worked for him in the past, but now he seems to be flailing. If it turns out that the lost cause is finally truly lost, then so is the president who made himself its champion. Yet, Baratunde, I have to say, with so many of our guests, I've been saying that the demographic and generational train is leaving the station. Doesn't this, in your view, leave the president more thoroughly isolated?
He is extraordinarily isolated, Brian, and unfortunately that can be very dangerous to a lot of us. But here's the good news. Where there is no leadership at the top of our national pyramid of leadership, there is great leadership on the ground. You mentioned some of this in your show already. Breonna's law is the law of the land in Louisville, Kentucky. No-knock raids and warrants are done. You look at the Colorado legislature, in just a week has severely reined in use of force. You look at Adidas retweeting Nikes in favor of Black lives. I never saw I'd see the day either of those companies challenged each other and supported each other in such a public fashion. So there is a growing wave here. And as is often the case with national leadership, the people are leading. And so what we lack in the White House, we actually have on the streets. And credit to the Black Visions Collective, to Black Lives Matter, to organizers all over this country who are reimagining what democracy, what citizenship, what participation, what America could and should look like.
Is that what gives you hope going into a weekend after the week we've had?
I have a couple of pieces of hope that are coming out of these 2 weeks of intensity. I think this president's isolation and his vulnerability and his smallness are being exposed to a larger and larger group of people. And so we're reckoning with the truth, and he's behind the ball. He can't acknowledge the truth because he's been so invested in lives. And as consensus grows that Black Lives Matter, as we see leaders on the ground, even leaders in corporations step into this moment, he's left behind. So we're agreeing that Black Lives Matter. And I think increasing numbers of people are realizing that this president doesn't.
Our guest has been Baratunde Thurston, who also happens to have given one of the great TED Talks of all time. Can't recommend it more highly. I've watched it multiple times. Thank you very much. Means a great deal to have you on with us.
It means a lot.
Coming up for us.